"It's fair to say I've got change on the brain," William had said not long ago, framing it as something he welcomes rather than fears. And on the final evening before King Charles was set to formally hand over the crown, that promise of transformation didn't arrive as a gentle shift. It landed like a thunderclap in a room built for tradition. What unfolded behind palace walls, away from cameras and curated smiles, was the kind of jaw-dropping royal drama that tabloids dream about but rarely get to describe with this level of detail. A private dinner detonated into a full-scale expulsion, with armed security moving in at the table, titles and access revoked on the spot, and Queen Camilla pushed into a panic so raw it was impossible to disguise. This wasn't a spat over protocol or a frostiness at a public engagement. This was the palace in its most ruthless mode, protecting itself from an alleged web of greed and an ugly attempt to weaponize a child for leverage, all brought to light by footage the perpetrators never knew existed. The shock wasn't simply that Tom and Laura, Camilla's grown stepchildren, were removed. It was the manner, the speed, and the message. The era of quiet indulgence was over, and the next reign would begin with a purge no one at that long oak table believed could ever happen to them. The West dining room had seen its share of strained family moments, but nothing like the suffocating tension that night. The guest list was deliberately tight, with no press and no outside observers to dilute what was about to occur, and the silence between clinks of cutlery felt engineered, like the hush before a verdict. Tom sat with restless energy, making a show of spearing his beef while his eyes kept flicking toward the heavy wooden doors that led down toward the palace's antique storage vault, as if he were mentally inventorying what lay beyond them. Across from him, Laura's composure was paper-thin. Her fingers drummed against the table in a jittery rhythm that betrayed more nerves than excitement, even as she positioned a large crocodile leather handbag on the chair beside her with pointed confidence. The zipper was left wide, almost theatrically, like she expected to leave with more than she arrived with. Camilla, seated with practiced authority, wore diamonds that caught the candlelight and seemed to encourage her smug, surveying glance around the room. Her expression carried the unmistakable air of someone convinced the next chapter would still bend in her family's favor, that the Parker Bowles orbit would keep its grip on privilege. At the center, William barely touched anything in front of him. No wine lifted, no knife and fork put to work. He simply watched, his attention moving between the trio with a focus that didn't read as anger so much as calculation, the expression of a man done entertaining delusions. Then William moved, and the sound alone changed the temperature in the room. He shoved his chair back with such certainty that the scrape across marble rang out, crisp and final, and when he reached inside his suit and withdrew a ring of sleek black brass keys, every eye snapped to his hand. These weren't symbolic trinkets or ceremonial accessories. They were the kind of keys people in the palace whisper about, the master access to restricted corridors, vaults, locked archives, and the royal jewelry collection itself, the physical proof of who is trusted with the crown's deepest infrastructure. Camilla leaned forward, chin tipped up, as if expecting a timid surrender or a negotiation disguised as family unity. Instead, William swung his arm and sent the heavy ring skidding across the silk tablecloth until it stopped at the edge of Tom's place setting. The shift on Tom's face was immediate, his confidence tightening into confusion. Before he could shape a response, William snapped his fingers, the sound sharp enough to slice through the last remnants of polite dinner theater. The carved doors at the end of the room flew open in unison, and 4 senior royal guards in black tactical gear swept inside with the kind of disciplined force that doesn't ask permission. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't indulge in speeches. He simply issued an order with chilling calm, the tone of someone who had already decided the outcome. The guards moved fast and the room erupted in chaos. 2 of them seized Tom by the arms, hands locking onto his biceps like clamps, yanking him up before he could even gather a full breath to protest. He exploded anyway, shouting, thrashing, and knocking over crystal glasses as his legs hit the table's edge. Laura didn't get a gentler treatment. Another guard grabbed her by the elbow and hauled her away as she shrieked, her nails scraping against body armor in a futile, desperate attempt to fight the inevitable. Her crocodile handbag slid off the chair and hit the floor with a heavy thud, the open zipper gaping like a mouth. William, arms folded, watched as if he were observing a procedure rather than a family meltdown. He ordered them stripped of every key card, car key, and royal credit line they had access to, and then he delivered the line that made the night unmistakable. They were to be removed through the main gates, and from that moment forward, if any of their family crossed the palace's stone boundary, they were to be arrested on sight. Camilla shot up so abruptly her chair toppled backward, her face flushed, veins standing out at her throat, and she lunged toward William with a ringed finger thrust inches from him, her outrage landing in the room like a slap. She demanded to know by what authority he dared treat her blood as criminals, and she insisted she would call Charles, promising consequences that sounded like she still believed the old hierarchy would rescue her. William didn't flinch. He stepped forward, forcing her backward, and in that single move the power dynamic flipped. The arrogance in her posture wavered when she realized he wasn't performing. He leaned in and lowered his voice, ensuring the message was meant for her alone, not the room. Charles had already watched the footage. William told her every second of it, from the charity money being handled to the moment Freddie's knee hit the ground. The words hit like a dart of poison. The color drained from Camilla's face as if someone had pulled a plug, and for the first time all evening, she appeared genuinely speechless, her mouth moving but producing nothing that could save her. To understand how a dinner could become a full-blown eviction with tactical guards and revoked access, the timeline has to rewind to 3 weeks earlier, when the story quietly turned. Balmoral in the stillness of early morning was the setting, and it sharply contradicted the fevered tabloid narrative that Charles was fading away behind closed doors. He was upright, alert, and measured in his reading room, the kind of calm that signals preparation rather than decline. When William arrived, there were no drawn-out pleasantries, no sentimental warm-up. Charles walked to a hidden safe behind a portrait, worked the dial with practiced ease, and removed the same distinctive ring of keys. When he placed them into William's hand, it wasn't a piece of paperwork or a vague promise. It was a tangible transfer of authority, the crown's machinery shifting to the next generation. Charles told him plainly that it was time, that the palace, its tunnels, and everything concealed beneath its polished floors would now be William's to command. Yet the keys didn't feel like triumph. In William's mind, they carried the faint stink of something rotten, a sense that while the world assumed the family was simply preparing for a ceremonial transition, something else had been happening inside the estate's locked doors. During Charles's limited appearances leading into the handover, the Parker Bowles faction had begun moving with the confidence of people who believed the building already belonged to them. Tom and Laura were seen drifting into restricted areas with a casualness that didn't match their official standing, and unmarked delivery vehicles appeared at side gates after dark, with timing too consistent to be coincidence. William didn't call police, and he didn't stage a dramatic family showdown because he understood the fundamental problem with parasites. They don't confess when you ask nicely. They simply learn how to hide better. Instead, he shifted into strategy. That very night, he abandoned the familiar, public-facing royal uniform and dressed in a black turtleneck, opting for anonymity and ease of movement, and he personally guided an underground security specialist through servant passageways and secret routes known only to those who maintain the palace's hidden skeleton. Within hours, micro-cameras were installed with surgical precision, tiny enough to disappear into painting frames in the South Annex, tucked near charity cash boxes, and mounted in chandeliers along the West Corridor. From that moment, the palace wasn't just a residence. It was a monitored stage, and the people who believed they were free to exploit it had no idea the walls were now watching. It didn't take long for the recordings to deliver what William needed. 3 days later, in a darkened room lit only by the cold glow of an encrypted laptop, the footage played like a brutal stripping away of aristocratic illusion. The first clip was timestamped deep into the night, 1:45 a.m. in the South Annex, and it showed Tom in a luxurious robe, glancing around with nervous impatience before cracking open a wooden door. 2 men in black suits slipped inside with the unmistakable posture of black market traders who know how to move through wealthy homes without leaving fingerprints. One of them shoved a swollen leather suitcase through the gap. Tom grabbed it quickly, opened it, and revealed stacks of cash bundled thickly without the clean markings of legitimate banking. In return, he pulled out 3 golden access cards, the kind reserved for special guests to enter zones that even many palace staff never see. The exchange was clear in its meaning: access sold for money, a private betrayal of the palace's security and reputation. Tom didn't even hide his hunger. He scooped bundles of cash into his pockets like a man convinced the rules were for other people. If Tom's video revealed corruption, Laura's footage made it feel uglier, more intimate, and more brazen. In broad daylight in a storage room, she stood before large wooden chests filled with public donations, the kind of funds meant to be handled with care and accountability. An elderly maid stood nearby, trembling, and Laura, through clenched teeth, ordered her to open the chest immediately. When the lid lifted, envelopes and loose bills were visible in an overwhelming pile, and Laura's red-nailed hand plunged in with zero hesitation. She didn't count. She grabbed fistfuls and shoved them into her designer bag as if she were scooping water from a sink. When the maid recoiled as though she might speak, Laura snapped, lunging forward to seize her by the collar and yank her closer. Her threat wasn't subtle or even creative, but it was devastating in its intent. If the maid breathed a word, Laura would ensure the woman and her family would never be seen in the country again. The video wasn't just about stolen cash. It captured entitlement, intimidation, and the confidence that Camilla's protection would make consequences impossible. And yet, for all the ugliness of money being siphoned away, the most disturbing piece wasn't the theft. It was the calculated use of a child as a shield. To keep the dirty stream of cash flowing without interference, the group needed a distraction big enough to make William hesitate, something capable of turning public sympathy and media pressure into a weapon. On the sixth day of the surveillance operation, the palace garden was calm, washed in autumn light, the kind of idyllic scene that usually exists only for photo ops. Prince George was on the lawn collecting tennis balls, moving with the casual energy of a child given a simple task. Nearby, about 10 meters away, Freddie, Camilla's biological grandson, was running in circles with a toy car. Then it happened. Freddie's heel caught on an oak root rising slightly through the grass, and he pitched forward, his knee scraping against the pebbled border of a flower bed. A small smear of blood appeared. It was the kind of minor childhood mishap that, in any normal family, results in a quick cuddle and a plaster. Freddie didn't even start screaming at first. He grimaced, sat down, and looked more surprised than hurt. George reacted the way many older children do when they see someone fall. He dropped what he was holding and ran over, kneeling down and reaching to help Freddie up, asking if he was okay. That gentle moment should have ended there. Instead, it became the opening scene of an alleged setup. From behind a thorny rose bush, Camilla surged forward with sudden speed, swatting George's hand away with a harsh slap. Her nails raked across his knuckles, leaving a visible scratch that made the 7-year-old pull back in shock. Camilla didn't soothe George, and she didn't even comfort Freddie. She lifted Freddie, gripping him with a firmness that looked less like concern and more like control, pinching his upper arm hard enough to make him jerk in pain. Then, in a low hiss, she instructed him to cry and to claim George pushed him. Freddie, hurt and confused, began to wail, and he pointed at George, repeating the accusation as if reciting a lesson. George shoved him on purpose. When footsteps approached, Camilla's face transformed instantly into a performance of heartbreak. She clutched Freddie dramatically, presented herself as the devastated grandmother, and accused George of deliberate cruelty, even raising her phone to photograph the blood on Freddie's knee and threatening to leak the images to tabloids to stain the Wales family's name. The goal in that moment was clear: frighten William into staying away from business conducted under Camilla's umbrella. What Camilla didn't account for was the quiet presence of a fourth guard, standing a short distance away, specifically chosen by William. On his chest, a disguised microcamera recorded everything with unforgiving clarity. Freddie's accidental trip, George's instinct to help, Camilla's slap, the pinch that coerced Freddie into tears, the scripted accusation, and the quick costume change into public victimhood. Every second was captured. When William later watched the footage in the same dark room where he'd reviewed the cash and the threats, he didn't explode. He didn't pound the desk or shout into the air. His reaction was more chilling than rage, a stillness so complete it felt like the temperature dropped. Whatever patience remained for internal compromise fractured in that moment. This wasn't merely about money or bad behavior. It was about turning children into tools to protect greed, about trying to smear his son's reputation to shield a scheme. The surveillance had done its work. Now, William needed a way to act that wouldn't drag the entire institution into open scandal. The next steps played out with the cold efficiency of someone determined to keep the crown from being publicly stained. William removed the matte black USB drive from his computer, holding it like a small, heavy verdict. He understood that running to outside authorities would create a spectacle that could splash across the monarchy itself, and for him, that was an unacceptable cost. If rot was living inside the house, he intended to deal with it by the house's own rules. The following morning, tension spread through the staff quarters when William summoned the elderly maid Laura had bullied into opening the donation chest. The woman arrived visibly terrified, hands slick, eyes darting, expecting retaliation from people with status and cruelty to spare. William didn't posture over her. He slid a sheet of white paper and a fountain pen across the desk and asked her to write down exactly what she had been forced to do. He told her directly that her loyalty was owed to the family she served, not to the opportunists exploiting it, and he promised that if she documented the truth, her own family would be protected. Tears hit the oak as she wrote, the words coming out line by line with the weight of months of swallowed fear. William then added a written statement from the guard who witnessed the garden incident, building a physical file to match the digital footage. With testimony clipped into a folder and the USB placed on top, William had what he needed, a tight, undeniable package of proof. Now he required something else, something strategic, the kind of move that gathers every target into one controlled setting and closes the exits. An invitation was delivered by hand to Camilla, Tom, and Laura for a private dinner in the West dining room. The note was almost insultingly brief, teasing that the transition of the throne would involve a restructuring of access and privileges. For Tom and Laura, it read like a payday. For Camilla, it looked like confirmation that her family's standing would remain unshaken. Laura, in her dressing room, painted on an extra bold layer of crimson lipstick, selected her biggest crocodile handbag and left it conspicuously empty, as if she expected to fill it with something far more valuable than cash. Tom chose an expensive tuxedo, slicked back his hair, and wore a smug grin that suggested he believed he was walking into a negotiation where he held leverage. Camilla fastened a treasured necklace and stepped forward with the certainty of someone who assumed her authority inside the palace was permanent. None of them seemed to grasp that they were heading toward a carefully arranged endgame. There was still one obstacle William had to clear before the dinner could become what he intended: King Charles himself. 3 hours before everyone took their seats, William walked the East Corridor with the file folder and USB in hand and entered Charles's office. The king, contrary to gossip, was not frail or confined. He stood at the window looking out over the estate with the calm posture of a man who knows a chapter is ending, but believes he has managed its closing. When William appeared, Charles greeted him with a quiet trust, the kind of father offers a son after handing him the keys to the kingdom. William didn't argue or dramatize. He walked to the desk, inserted the USB into the monitor, and pressed play. Charles leaned in as the first video unfolded. The South Annex in darkness, Tom receiving the leather suitcase, the stacks of unsealed cash, the golden access cards exchanged like contraband. Charles's jaw tightened. The second clip followed immediately. Laura's frantic scooping of donation money, the maid's trembling hands, the threat delivered with casual cruelty. Charles's breathing grew heavier, his face darkening in real time as the picture of exploitation sharpened. Then came the final blow, the one that didn't just offend or anger but seemed to hollow him out. The garden footage appeared in bright sunlight, making the cruelty look even more shocking against the idyllic setting. Freddie's stumble, George's kneel to help, and then Camilla storming into frame with sharp movements and sharper intent. Charles watched his wife pinch her grandson into compliance, watched her force a child into a performance, watched her fling a lie at his direct bloodline while threatening to use the tabloids as a weapon. The screen eventually went black, reflecting Charles's face in that blank darkness, and the office filled with a silence so thick it felt like the air had been siphoned out. He gripped the desk, knuckles whitening, veins standing out against his skin. This wasn't a political enemy striking from outside. It was betrayal blooming inside his own chosen life, a humiliation made worse by the sacrifices he'd made for Camilla over decades of public outrage. He didn't reach for paperwork, didn't call anyone in, didn't deliver a roaring decree. He stepped back into the shadows, closed his eyes, and nodded once, a minimal gesture that carried the weight of absolute permission. William turned and left, the verdict authorized without a word. That is why back in the West dining room, Camilla's confidence collapsed the moment William murmured that Charles had already seen everything. The threat of "I'll call the king" evaporated because the king had already watched the truth. When William repeated the command to take them out, there was no room left for bargaining. Tom was lifted by the arms and dragged across marble, his expensive shoes scraping and leaving pathetic marks as his body resisted less and less, confidence melting into helplessness. Laura fought harder, twisting and clawing at the guard's armor as if rage could reverse reality. In the frenzy, her arm struck the empty chair, and her crocodile handbag flipped, hitting the rug hard enough for the zipper to split wider. The most humiliating evidence spilled out under candlelight. Bundles of high-denomination cash scattered across the Turkish rug, fluttering and sliding as glossy black boots stepped through them. What had been hidden behind closed doors was now strewn across the floor like confetti at a disgraceful party, the kind of sight that makes excuses impossible. Laura cried out, lunging toward the money as if she could scoop the evidence back into invisibility, but the guard tightened his hold and hauled her toward the doors, leaving the cash behind as a silent, damning exhibit. Camilla didn't scream again. She didn't lunge a second time. She simply froze, knees shaking until she dropped to the carpet, her ringed hands pressing into the fibers as if she could physically hold onto power that had already shattered. The garden footage, especially the moment involving her own grandson, had stripped her of the last shield she could have used against William: moral authority, family loyalty, even the ability to play victim convincingly. A guard approached and stood before her, his silhouette cutting off the light, and while his handling of her was less overtly brutal than the way Tom and Laura were manhandled, the dominance was unmistakable. He informed her that cars were waiting at the side entrance. The sentence sounded polite, but it carried the weight of an order that couldn't be refused. Camilla was lifted to her feet and escorted through corridors that suddenly felt endless. Along the hallway, staff members who had been intimidated and threatened by her circle stood quietly. No one cheered, but their lifted chins and unblinking stares communicated something sharper than applause: contempt, satisfaction, and a sense of long-delayed correction. In the courtyard, the night looked ink black around 3 armored SUVs idling without any decorative royal insignia. The lack of markings made the moment feel even more severe, as if the palace itself had decided not to publicly claim them. Doors opened. Tom and Laura were shoved into the back seats with the same no-nonsense force that had removed them from the table. Camilla climbed into a vehicle last, her posture small, swallowed by the dark interior. When the door slammed shut, it felt symbolic, sealing away not just bodies but a chapter of entitlement and alleged exploitation. From the palace steps, William stood with his hands clasped behind his back, the night wind tugging at his black coat as he watched the convoy roll silently through the main gates and disappear into the dark. The engines faded, and the grounds returned to a pristine quiet that felt almost eerie after the spectacle. William stepped back inside and pulled the massive oak doors closed, cutting off the outside world and sealing the palace in its own controlled hush. Down the deserted hallway toward the private quarters, the adrenaline of the purge gave way to something heavier: exhaustion. At the far end, Kate was waiting, dressed in dark tones, her eyes locked onto his with the kind of understanding that doesn't require a question. She didn't ask what happened because the answer was written across his face, the look of someone who has just cut out a tumor and knows the surgery was necessary even if the process was brutal. She stepped forward and threaded her fingers into his, grounding him in the quiet aftermath. The crown in that moment was protected from hands willing to steal and from a scheme willing to smear a child to maintain power. The price, though, was unmistakable. Winning came with isolation, with a chill that settles in when trust has been broken inside the same walls meant to represent unity. The monarchy could move into a new era, but the fractures left behind wouldn't simply vanish because the offenders were gone. And somewhere far from the palace lights, the story doesn't feel neatly finished. A woman stripped of access and influence can still hold on to resentment, and resentment, cornered and humiliated, has a way of hardening into something dangerous. Camilla may have lost the tools she used within those corridors, but the bitterness of being forced out so publicly could still smolder, especially if she believes she was outmaneuvered rather than wrong. The immediate battle inside the palace may have ended with locked doors and an empty dining room, but the emotional fallout of a family war at the top of the world rarely stays contained forever. Do you think Camilla and her stepchildren will accept this exile in silence, or does this night feel like the spark for a more venomous attempt at retaliation from beyond the gates? Tell us what you think in the comments, and if you want more Royals and Dreamers updates, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, then tap the next video on your screen for another twist-filled deep dive.